Hey everyone, it's Glenn Rawson. It still seems a little awkward, although I've spent a lot of time on camera. It still seems a little awkward to be doing this in my office, staring at a cell phone, but we'll do the best that we can. I appreciate my daughter Annie, who's running one of the cameras today, and Jason, who's running the other. By the way, for Annie's sake, she wants to know if Krispy Kreme will deliver donuts because she has a prom date that she has to answer with donuts. Right, Annie?
Yeah.
And she has to answer them with donuts, and she needs an even dozen. She needs to know if they'll deliver. So now that we've covered the very important things, if you know if Krispy Kreme delivers, let us know, because Annie is waiting to get out of here. And by the way, she's answering a prom date to a dance that she can't go to because it's been canceled. Go figure. Anyway, on to better things. I have a story that sets the tone for what I want to talk about tonight. And I begin with a question. Does it follow that only perfect people can do good and be good, accomplish great things? I think you and I would both realize that no. You don't have to be perfect to please our Father in heaven and to do good things. For example, Emma was 39 years old when her husband was violently murdered, leaving her with 5 small children to raise and an incredible burden of care. Nevertheless, we don't know exactly all that she thought, but she determined that she would move forward with courage, she would face the future, and she would succeed and take care of herself and her little ones. About 3.5 years later, she made the decision to marry again. Her new husband's name was Lewis. And Lewis, well, they called him Major Bitterman. He was a little bit of an interesting character, had something of a checkered past, was known to drink a little, and had a reputation of something of a womanizer. But Emma and Lewis got married, and they had, I guess, from all the record, a happy and successful marriage. Then, as it turned out, many years later, about 17 years into that marriage, there was a woman in the community, a young woman by the name of Nancy Abercrombie, and she turned up in the community pregnant, and she was not married. It became evident to all and became known that the father of Nancy's child was Lewis, Emma's husband. Now, what Emma did after that is remarkable because evidently from the record, without bitterness or rancor, she forgave him and they went on. Now, the story doesn't end there because 4 years later, Nancy, struggling to survive with her young son, came to Emma and asked Emma if she would take in little Charles and raise him as her own. Can you imagine being asked to adopt, as it were, your husband's illegitimate son? Well, she did. She took Charles in and began to raise him as her own son. She treated him with so much love and respect and kindness that Charles would later say this about her. He said, quote, "I was raised in her home and knew what kind of a woman she was. She was a person of very even temper. I never heard her say an unkind word or raise her voice in anger or contention. She had a queenly bearing without the arrogance of a queen. A noble woman, living and showing charity for all, loving and beloved." End of quote. Emma's compassion for those around her, and especially within the walls of her own home, grew and continued. There came a day, some years later, when Emma went to Nancy and asked Nancy to move into the home and live with her family to be close to her son. And she did. Then one April day, not sure if this was 1878 or 1879, I'm not sure, probably 79, Emma summoned Lewis, her husband, and Nancy to her bedside. And by the way, by that time, Nancy had become a friend and a sister, not a servant or a slave girl. She summoned them both to her bedside, and she asked them, because she knew her time was short and she wouldn't live much longer, she asked them that when she was gone, if they would wed and provide the kind of parents for Charles that he deserved. Well, a year later, Emma passed away, and a year later, Lewis and Nancy did indeed get married. Now the conclusion of the story. Over the next few weeks from that event, Emma's health declined steadily. Her need for care became constant and exhausting. Her sons took turns watching over her. Then one night, in the pre-dawn darkness, while her son sat by her bedside in the darkness, Emma suddenly rose up out of the bed, stretched out her arms, and said, "Joseph, Joseph, Joseph. Yes, yes, I'm coming." Those were her last words. At 20 minutes past 4 in the morning of April 30th, 1879, Emma Hale Smith, the elect lady, passed from this life into the next and into the arms of her husband, Joseph. Now, I tell you that story for this reason. Everyone knows that Emma did not come west with the church. I think everyone knows that Emma struggled with plural marriage mightily, and she afflicted Joseph because of plural marriage, and I really can't say as I blame her. And everyone knows that Emma and Brigham Young did not get along all that well. Whatever reasons Emma had for staying in Nauvoo, I don't know. She took those to the grave with her. But this much I am confident of. She was the elect lady right up until the day she died, and that she is with the prophet Joseph now. I can't prove that. I just believe that. But the larger point is, Emma was the embodiment, to me, of Relief Society. I have a memory of Relief Society. I didn't grow up as a member of the church. My grandmother was an active member of the church, and she often referred to me as her little heathen. And I was, because I didn't belong to any church. But I remember going to visit my dear old grandmother in Ashton, Idaho, and hearing her talk about Relief Society, and not having any idea what she was doing and why she would go to organizational meetings to make quilts and soup and stuff like that. I never understood it, but I think I do now. Today marks, yes, St. Patrick's Day, but today also celebrates the anniversary of the organization of Relief Society. Let me tell you just a very quick story. March 4th, 1842. If you've been to Nauvoo, you know where Sarah Granger Kimball's home sat on the outskirts of Nauvoo down towards the river. Going right in front of Sarah's house was one of the main roads going out to the quarry. And every day, men with wagons and teams would come up that road past Sarah's house, turn, and go up to the temple. One day, Sarah and a neighbor, a Mrs. Cook, were talking. Mrs. Cook expressed a desire, according to Sister Kimball, expressed a desire to do something for the workmen on the temple. Sarah suggested, and by the way, she was married to a wealthy merchant, Hiram Kimball. She suggested that she would provide fabric if Mrs. Cook would sew shirts for the workmen on the temple. I know most of the women have heard this story. They agreed. But then the suggestion was made, well, maybe others would want to join us. You see, sewing societies and benevolent societies were very much the thing in the 19th century. What they were doing was not unusual. It was more the norm than the exception. So they decided that about a week later, they would invite a group of women to come to their home. Well, they did. Someone suggested that they invite Eliza R. Snow, who would take down the notes and write the Constitution for this new organization. Eliza was 38 years old, had training working for her father as who was a justice of the peace. So she was an eloquent writer, and she understood parliamentary procedures and rules of order. Well, Eliza attended the meeting. She wrote the Constitution, and as instructed, she took it to the prophet Joseph Smith for his approval. And he said, and you all know this story, "This is the finest Constitution I've ever seen. But tell the sisters I have something better." Better than what? And better how? He instructed them to come to the red brick store on the 17th of March for a meeting. When they came to that meeting, the prophet Joseph Smith organized them according to the order of the priesthood. Rather than being a woman's benevolent society with a president, vice president, and following the rules and procedures of the world, he organized them according to the pattern of the priesthood, with a president, a first counselor, a second counselor, and set apart according to the pattern and authority of the priesthood, and then to operate not by Republican principles, but to operate according to the Spirit of the Lord. He instructed the sisters, you don't need a written constitution. The decisions of this body of women in council will become, by their precedence, your constitution. And thus they were organized. Emma Smith was voted to become the president of the Relief Society. She chose Sarah Ann Whitney and Elizabeth Ann Whitney and Sarah Cleveland as her counselors, both of whom, significantly, were women who had ministered to Emma in her times of great distress, demonstrating right from the beginning that compassion and charity was the watchword of what this new organization would be. Well, there's a lot of things that happened in that first meeting. John Taylor set these women apart, and Joseph Smith gave them the first $5 gold piece. All that I have, he said, I give to the organization of this, to give to this organization. And then Emma said something, which, even though she was referring, and I'll finish the quote, she said, "We are going to do something extraordinary. We expect extraordinary occasions and pressing calls." Now, Emma was referring to a ship or a riverboat getting stuck out in the rapids, out in the river, and that they would do something extraordinary and immediate to rescue that boat. That's what she was referencing. Little did she know that the organization that she was the founding president of would minister to the relief and the salvation of our Father in Heaven's children all over the world. Little did Emma understand on that first day, though Joseph did, that the Relief Society would become one of the largest and most powerful women's organizations in the world. Now, I could go on, and I have a lot of notes, but I'm not going to take the time to give you all of that. I want to see if I can encapsulate it this way. What did Joseph intend Relief Society to be? Well, before I answer that question, let me share an insight with you that came to me from Sherry L. Dew. Sister Dew described a situation when we went to the 3-hour block back in the 70s. The Relief Society president at the time was Barbara B. Smith. And Barbara B. Smith made the comment that she feared by going to the 3-hour block that Relief Society would become just another class. Now, Sherry worded it this way: Relief Society has indeed become just another class. If you don't have a calling in young women's or primary, you go to Relief Society. It became, she said, a default class for old ladies. That is not at all what Relief Society was intended to be. A default class for old ladies. This is I'll just quote it to you. The prophet Joseph said on the 31st of March, 1842, and this says it all. This society should move according to the ancient priesthood. I say that again. This society should move according to the ancient priesthood. Hence, there should be a select society separate from all the evils of the world, choice, virtuous, and holy. I am going to make of this society a kingdom of priests, as in, meaning priestesses, a kingdom of priests, as in Enoch's day, as in Paul's day. Let me explain. At the same time that the prophet Joseph Smith is organizing the first women's quorum, or the women's quorum in the church, because that's what it would come to be known as. The brethren have their quorums, the women have a quorum. At the same time he's organizing this women's quorum, the prophet Joseph Smith is organizing quietly, reverently, and secretly the ordinances of the endowment. The endowment, the ordinances of the temple, were being revealed at the same time as the organization of the Relief Society. What the prophet Joseph intended Relief Society to be was a society of holy women, worthy and capable of administering the ordinances of the endowment. And indeed, when the temple ordinances began to be administered, it was the women of the Relief Society who were those who did that administering. Emma would have been the equivalent of the first temple matron. The prophet Joseph intended this to be a society of holy, pure, virtuous, compassionate women, separate from the evils and disgusting things of the world. What were they supposed to do? I won't take the time to quote all of it from the prophet Joseph Smith, but suffice it to say, he would say to the women, charity and compassion are a part of your nature. It is what you were born to be and to do. He said, your job as the Relief Society is to seek out the poor, minister to the wants and the needs of the poor and the downtrodden, lift up the hands that hang down, and strengthen the feeble knees. That's what you're supposed to do. And then he would go on to say to them, don't be too harsh. Don't be judgmental. Look to the poor. Seek out the poor. Take care of them. I'm not sure what he meant by this next statement, but he said, provoke the brethren to good works. Eliza R. Snow would later say, it doesn't matter if we get a little bit ahead of the brethren. They can catch up. And that's just about how she put it. But the prophet Joseph said to the women of the Relief Society one of my favorite quotes he ever said. He said, nothing is so much calculated to lead this people to forsake sin as to take them by the hand and watch over them with tenderness. And then speaking personally, he said, when persons manifest the least kindness and love to me, oh, what power it has over my mind. While the opposite course, meaning harshness, judgmentalness, gossip, meanness, the opposite course has a tendency to harrow up all of the negative, harsh feelings and depress the human mind. End of quote. Joseph taught that the Relief Society was not just to see to the poor. Their responsibility was to save souls. They were to become the greatest, most compassionate quorum of holy women, seeking out and ministering to the poor and bringing souls unto Christ. The Relief Society was meant to be a temple missionary organization. Now, one last thought. Sister Sherry, mentioned to me in an interview when we were talking that when she was part of the Relief Society General President, she had a meeting with a member of the Quorum of the 12. She didn't name who that was. But she said in the course of that meeting, while he instructed the new presidency, he said, the organization of the Relief Society in 1842 was not an organization. It was a reorganization. It was a restoration. In other words, when the prophet Joseph says, I will make of this society a kingdom of priests, as in Enoch's day, as in Paul's day, Relief Society has been around since the days of the ancient prophets. And it's here again. And there is power in the women of this church. I've seen it. I've been part of it. And what does it lead to? Where does it go? I want to share a very special, sacred story to me about the 5th General President of the Relief Society. We okay, Jason?
We're good. You want to respond to a couple comments?
Not yet.
All right.
Not yet. In a minute. Annie, you okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. This was somewhere around the turn of the 20th century. Emmeline, as most people called her, was very elderly. And she was living in a small apartment in the Hotel Utah, and the very next day she was going to go to the temple. Now, nearby was the local high school, and 2 girls were charged with the responsibility to go to the Hotel Utah, collect Emmeline, and bring her to the high school for their noon devotional. I think it was West High. I'm not sure. The high school's in Salt Lake. But so they traveled over to the Hotel Utah and went upstairs to get Emmeline. When they knocked and were invited in, there they found this lovely octogenarian, this little old lady, sitting there getting dressed and getting her hair just right. Beautiful woman. And they sat down and they waited for her, and after a moment, she said to the 2 girls, I'm not even sure I should be telling you this story. The 2 girls sat down across from Emmeline, and she said, in effect, I want to tell you something. When you go to the temple, promise me, she said, that you will never, never go with soiled clothes or with clothes that are wrinkled. And then she shared the following story. She talked about how, just a short time before, she was going to go to the temple. And she felt strongly impressed that she needed to make extra care for her clothing, that it was clean and pressed just right. So she did. And with her dress just right, she went across the street to the temple. As she went in, she was going up a little ramp, just getting ready to turn into the first room, when there, standing before her, was the Lord Jesus Christ. He stood in the air above the floor, and the first thing he said to her was, Emmeline, how beautiful you are in your beautiful dress. She told that story, and she didn't elaborate on any more that happened after that. Sacred secret. But she told these 2 teenage girls, promise me you will never, never go with soiled clothes or with clothes that are wrinkled to the temple. Because she said, one day you will see the Savior there. Emmeline was Emmeline Wells, the 5th General President of the Relief Society. You can say what you want. I've lived long enough to see the power of the women of the church. I've lived long enough to see Relief Society perfect these women and exalt them and prepare them to meet the Savior. My own sister-in-law, my wife, and others. Some of the most perfect people I will ever meet. And that, by the Savior's power, manifests in Relief Society. It is not the default class for old ladies. And those thoughts and that testimony I leave with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, if you would like to know a little bit more about this, okay? The greatest book that's ever been written on Relief Society, in my opinion, is this one right here. Written by the sisters of the church about the first 50 years of Relief Society. Everything you could ever want to know is in this book. And no, I'm not selling it. You can get it at Deseret Book. But I know the women, some of them, who wrote it. And it is awesome. If you want an abbreviated account, History of the Saints produced this documentary called about Relief Society, Extraordinary Things Then and Now. It is available in DVD. It's also available as a digital download at historyofthesaints.org. And I might just, pardon me, but History of the Saints just came out with this brand new book called about Nauvoo, the city beautiful. It's also available at historyofthesaints.org, but I'm not here to give you a sales pitch. If you want it, it's there. Okay, Jason.
I'm going to read some comments and respond to questions. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and post something.
Katie Olson in Texas, bless you. Let's see. Provoke, Sylvia. Wow. I don't see any questions. Oh, it's hard to hear me. I'm sorry.
The saddle.
Yeah. What about the? I can't find it. What about the saddle?
Somebody was asking why the saddle in your office.
Oh, the saddle in my office? Well, this whole thing is my office. If you could see the other wall over here, it's bookshelves made out of raw wood going all the way to the ceiling. This is my man cave. The saddle is almost 100 years old. I had that saddle when I was just a little boy, 4 years old. And so it's a precious keepsake, and it's still a working saddle. Anyway, I think that's all there is to say. We will be back Sunday at 1 o'clock for a short devotional, not church and not a sacrament meeting talk. My expertise is church history. On Sunday, we'll share something about the pioneers. Thanks for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I hope this helped. And if there's anything we can do to help you with any of these future devotionals, please let me know. We're just trying to help. Thanks.